Antoine François Prévost d'Aix, usually known simply as the Abbé Prévost, was a French author and novelist. Life and works. He was born at Hesdin, Artois, and first appears with the full name of Prévost d'Aix in a letter to the booksellers of Amsterdam in 1731. His father, Lieven Prévost, was a lawyer, and several members of the family had embraced the ecclesiastical estate. Prévost was educated at the Jesuit school of Hesdin, and in 1713 became a novice of the order in Paris, pursuing his studies at the same time at the college in La Flèche. At the end of 1716 he left the Jesuits to join the army, but soon tired of military life, and returned to Paris in 1719, apparently with the idea of resuming his novitiate. He is said to have traveled in the Netherlands about this time. In any case, he returned to the army, this time with a commission. Some biographers have assumed that he suffered some of the misfortunes assigned to his hero Desgrieux. Whatever the truth, he joined the learned community of the Benedictines of St. Maur, with whom he found refuge. He himself says, after the unlucky termination of a love affair, he took his vows at Jumièges in 1721 after a year's novitiate, and in 1726 took priest's orders at St. Germain de Flex. He spent 7 years in various houses of the order, teaching, preaching and studying. In 1728 he was sent to the Abbey of Saint-Germain des Prés, Paris, where he contributed to the Gallia Christiana, a work of historiographic documentation undertaken communally by the monks in continuation of the works of Denis de Saint-Martin, who had been a member of their order. His restless spirit made him seek from the Pope a transfer to the easier rule of Cluny, but he left the abbey without leave, and, learning that his superiors had obtained a lettre de cachet against him, fled to England. In London he acquired a wide knowledge of English history and literature, as can be seen in his writings. Before leaving the Benedictines, Prévost had begun perhaps his most famous novel, Memoires et Aventures d'un homme de qualité qui s'est retiré du monde, the first 4 volumes of which were published in Paris in 1728, and 2 years later at Amsterdam. In 1729 he left England for the Netherlands, where he began to publish a novel, the material of which, at least, had been gathered in London. La philosophie anglaise, our histoire de Monsieur Cleveland, fils naturel de Cromwell, écrite par lui-même, et traduite de l'anglais. A spurious 5th volume contained attacks on the Jesuits, and an English translation of the whole appeared in 1734. Meanwhile, during his residence at The Hague, he engaged on a translation of De Thou's Historia, and, relying on the popularity of his first book, published at Amsterdam a suite in 3 volumes, forming volumes V, and 7 of the original Memoires et Aventures d'un homme de qualité. The 7th volume contained the famous Manon Lescaut, separately published in Paris in 1731 as Histoire du Chevalier Desgrieux et de Manon Lescaut. The book was eagerly read, chiefly in pirated copies, being forbidden in France. In 1733 he left The Hague for London in company of a lady whose character, according to Prévost's enemies, was doubtful. In London he edited a weekly gazette on the model of Joseph Addison's Spectator, Le Pour et Contre, which he continued to produce in collaboration with the playwright Charles Huxley, favoured us and marked with short intervals, until 1740. In the autumn of 1734 Prévost was reconciled with the Benedictines, and, returning to France, was received in the Benedictine monastery of Le Croix-Saint-Leroy in the diocese of Évreux to pass through a new, though brief, novitiate. In 1735 he was dispensed from residence in a monastery by becoming almoner to the Prince de Conti, and in 1754 obtained the priory of St. Georges des Chaines. He continued to produce novels and translations from the English, and, with the exception of a brief exile spent in Brussels and Frankfurt, he resided for the most part at Chantilly until his death, which took place suddenly while he was walking in the neighboring woods. The cause of his death, the rupture of an aneurysm, is all that is definitely known. Stories of crime and disaster were related of Prévost by his enemies, and diligently repeated, but appear to be apocryphal. Prévost's other works include Le Doyen de Killerine, Histoire morale composée sur les mémoires d'une illustre famille d'Irlande, Tout pour l'amour, a translation of Dryden's tragedy, Histoire d'un grec moderne, L'histoire de Marguerite d'Anjou, Mémoires pour servir à l'histoire de Malta, Campagnes philosophiques aux mémoires, contenant l'histoire de la guerre d'Irlande, Histoire de Guillaume le Conquérant, Histoire générale des voyages, continued by other writers. Manuel Lexique, continued by other writers. Translations from Samuel Richardson. Lettres anglaises aux histoires de Miss Clarice Harlovey, from Richardson's Clarissa and Nouvelles Lettres anglaises, aux histoires du Chevalier Grandison. Memoirs pour servir à l'histoire de la Virtus, from Mrs. Sheridan's Memoirs of Miss Sidney Biddulph. Histoire de la Maison de Stuart, from Hume's History of England to 1688. Le Monde Moral, aux Memoirs pour servir à l'histoire du cas humain. Modern editions. The standard edition of Prévost's works is Ouvers, dir. Jeunesse Garde, Presses Universitaires de Grenoble, 8 vols. 1977 to 1986. There have been many editions of Man and Lescaut, of which the most recent are by Jeunesse Garde and Jean Guillemot. There is also a separate edition of Cleveland by Jeunesse Garde and Philip Stewart, Paris, de Joncas, 2003. Histoire d'un grec moderne, EQD, Jeunesse Garde, Presses Universitaires de Grenoble, 1989.